That is because it's morning for me. This is my Sunday Morning Live podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Tomlinson. Give people a chance to jump on here live. If you're watching by replay, I appreciate the replay watch. And I just need to share this in the Facebook group real quick, change the settings. So just give me a chance to do that. Hope everybody's doing well out there. There's that. Just make sure I got it right here. If you're watching live, comment for me in the comments so I know where you're watching from. That would be cool. Yeah, looks like everything got shared appropriately. For whatever reason, I'm not able to stream live into the private group. I have to share it from my personal page. And I'm not sure why that is. Good morning, Marietta. Thanks for jumping on. A couple other people jumping on. All right, let's jump into the topic. I want to talk about the all self, or the whole self. This morning, the divine self, which includes every aspect and every part of us. So something I've been discussing or discussed last week was this whole idea of competing. Now, let me back up. Let me back up and start over. Let me say this. We don't like to be wrong. We don't like to be wrong. And I'm not saying that we should like being wrong, but sometimes there are things in our paradigm that is all part of a social programming that isn't necessarily helpful or beneficial for us, that we don't realize, but it's so ingrained in our, not only our social programming, but what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. I want you to think about that term, the collective unconscious. Let's just kind of break that down. First of all, if it's collective unconscious, it is collective. It's part of a group. It's part of a way of seeing the world or a way of thinking that belongs to a group. And in Carl Jung's theories, there is a collective unconscious, or a collection of way of thinking, or a collection of consciousness that structures all of human thought. That's something that we all share in common, regardless of where we're born, regardless of what generation we're born into, that these, what he called archetypes that are in the collective unconscious, become the organizing principles around which all human consciousness is structured. And I think there is a lot of validity to that theory and that belief. I think that there are certain, there has to be, it's just common sense that there has to be some kind of consistent organizing patterns or principles or archetypes. The word archetype can mean the first in a series. So the original pattern or blueprint for a series of other things like it that is to come along. Let me give you a simple example. A chair has an archetype to it. It has an original pattern or blueprint to it of a human being supported by a structure when they sit down. So in other words, not just sitting on the dirt or sitting on the floor, but some kind of structure that supports us, supports our weight, and holds us up in a sitting position. That's the original pattern and blueprint. Then from that archetype comes all kinds of different types of chairs. We can include sofas in that. We can include recliners, kitchen table chairs, desk, office chairs. We could even include toilets in that series of things that comes out of the archetype of a chair, the idea of a structure that is supporting a human being. They all may be different. They may be different colors, different sizes, have different degrees of padding or no padding. Some may recline, some may not. Some may be tilted a certain way. Some may be somewhat reclined, or you're able to recline them and not recline them. Some chairs, I have one, have a little bit of reclining in them, and it's fixed. It's very comfortable, by the way. A bean bag could be thrown in there. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about archetypes. So Carl Jung says that there are certain archetypal symbols that exist within the consciousness of every human being born. So in other words, here's the idea. If you were able to take a community of babies who had just been born and completely isolate them from any kind of social contact or social programming and transport them, let's say, to the planet Venus, just for fun, or a moon colony that they build and terraform on the moon, and you isolate them completely from any kind of human contact, eventually there are going to be certain types of stories, certain type of patterns in behavior and in the way of thinking that are going to become just as consistent with that new community, with that new colony, as any other group of human beings born anywhere at any time around the planet. So there are certain feminine archetypes. There are certain masculine archetypes. There is a hero archetype that Joseph Campbell made popular. And so there are certain organizing patterns within humanity that are probably parameters that we won't, that are sort of the fences, perhaps, sort of the playing field upon which human consciousness is at least currently growing and developing with those organizing principles. Then within that collective unconscious, now here's the key. So I said it would be collective. And then the other part I said was that it would be unconscious. We're not aware of it. There are certain things about the way we view the world. There are certain ways in certain things that are built into our paradigm. A paradigm is just a fancy term for a way of seeing things, a way of perceiving things. In other words, there are other things that we get depending upon where we're born, depending upon our, let's just say geographic location. Let's just start there. That is also a collective unconscious. It's different than Jung's collective unconscious in that it's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more confined. In other words, there are beliefs, there are patterns, there are symbols that we are born into as being members of whatever part of the world geographically that we are. So if you divide the world primarily, or your biggest division that you start out with is East and West, then being born as a Westerner, you're going to have symbols, ideas, beliefs that structure your way of viewing the world that is part of the Western collective unconscious. Now, again, I want to stress that it's collective and that it is unconscious. I think it's interesting. Someone in the comments, I can't see the name, I don't think, or I don't think I see the name. But says the ancient Indian scriptures beautifully covered this topic while the Bible does not mention it. So great timing on that comment, because I'm talking about the East versus West division in the way that we see the world. And so there are certain ways that the East will see the world and certain ways that the East will see consciousness that the West isn't necessarily enlightened to or doesn't necessarily see. One is not necessarily better than the other. I think each one has its advantages and each one has its limitations. That's my personal opinion on that. But it perfectly illustrates the point that there are certain things about Western worldview, about the way that we see the world as Westerners, that are built into our collective unconscious, which means that it is something that we all share in common, and it is something that we are mostly unconscious about. Now, now imagine this, if you could get outside the parameters or the limitations of Jung's collective unconscious, what might become possible to us? Because those are limitations. Even though they're necessary for structure, there has to be limitation within structure. Now, each time we become part of a group, that view becomes more constricted by presuppositions or beliefs or ideas that we have, that we don't even realize we have, that are part of our collective consciousness as Westerners, and that we are unconscious to. Now, why am I stressing this at the beginning? This seems like a strange thing to stress at the beginning. I'm stressing this at the beginning because when something that is in the collective unconscious becomes, this person says you've just got yourself a new subscriber. Appreciate your recognition of my comment. Thank you. I appreciate you subscribing. It helps us. But so when something in the collective unconscious becomes challenged, we are absolutely not going to receive the challenge at the beginning. We are going to assume that our way of viewing the world is correct, and whoever is challenging that particular belief is automatically wrong. Why? Because what is in our collective unconscious as part of a group, and then that we grow up with having reinforced over and over and over again, is so second nature to us that we assume it has to be right. The map has to be the territory. We assume it has to be right. That's why it's a presupposition. There's no way that presupposition is wrong. So that's the first thing. Intuitively, it just feels so true, it feels so real, it feels so right, that there's absolutely no way that we will receive. Most people, there are always exceptions to the rule, but generally most people are not going to receive a challenge to something so deeply embedded for generations that it's like literally almost part of the DNA. It may be part of the DNA and part of the genetic consciousness. So the moment that it's challenged, the first time that it's challenged, the first time that we hear it, we're going to automatically dismiss it and say that's crazy. We might even mock it. We might even laugh at it, or whatever the case may be. But again, that's only because we're confusing the map with the territory. In other words, what I'm saying is we won't even take the time to think it through or to give it a fair hearing. We will automatically reject it as false and go back about our lives. Now, for some people, it becomes like a seed. It becomes almost like a virus, if you will. And I'm speaking of like a computer virus that begins to work. We start mulling it over. Some people become angry about it. Some people become mad about it. They become obsessed with it in a negative way, in the sense they want to prove that wrong. Or we'll just start thinking about it. And then we may be exposed to this idea and this thought over and over and over again. And then sometimes by the repetitive nature of things, it's like, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, where we have that aha moment, where we have that awakening moment. We're like, oh, wow, the world really is this way and not the way that I've always thought that it was. Aaron, why are you stressing this? Because I want to address something that I addressed last week, and I didn't get a lot of pushback on it. I'm not going to get a lot of pushback from this group, but I would in other circles for sure. I want to address something that I believe is part of the Western collective unconscious. So it's part of something that we are almost literally born to believe, that is part of our paradigm, our way of seeing the nature of things, our way of seeing reality, that really is just part of a map and not part of a territory. And I want to suggest to you that there is a different way of viewing the world without this belief that I'm going to talk about again in a moment, that comes down to us from Christian scriptures, from really Abrahamic religions. And that is that we begin our approach to spirituality, to anything that we do in spirituality, we begin the approach from the place of sin and from the place of the fall and from the need for redemption, sinful redemption. Now, some people may be out there saying, nah, I can't relate to that. I wasn't really raised a Christian, but I'm going to get to a belief that supports the sinful redemption belief system. In other words, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into something that I do believe is part of almost everybody's paradigm and worldview, that is so unconscious and so much part of the collective unconsciousness of the West that it just seems so true that we'll probably get triggered if we challenge it, because it will force us to see the world in a completely different way. And that's going to be like shuffling the cards on our belief system. That's going to force us to completely reorganize, because it's such a beginning principle. It's such an archetype for people in the West that it's going to force us to completely reorganize a pattern and a way of thinking about the world that will cause us to see that perception, not just of the world, but the perception of the self differently. So I want to say that spirituality begins very subtly with some people with sin, fall, and redemption. In other words, it begins with a problem within humanity that needs to be solved. So that almost every system, not just of spirituality, but psychology, self-help, just about any approach to consciousness or to the self within Western models that get talked about, that cause books to get published, like I said, not just within spirituality, not just within religion, but within psychology and counseling, within all kinds of various different places, is that idea that there is something wrong with us that needs to be fixed. That's another way of saying sinful redemption. There's something wrong with us. There's something that needs to be fixed. There's something that needs to be transformed or needs to be changed. Now, granted, there are things that can be transmuted. There are things that need to be fixed. There are things that need to be changed. But that doesn't have to be the starting point of everything. That doesn't have to be the archetype for everything. So, for example, in Christianity, anything that has, the Genesis story from the scriptures in it, of the fall of Adam and Eve, that perceives that as something that is passed on to humanity, whether it is inherently, as most Christians believe, through the taint of original sin, or whether it's environmentally, as a lot of Eastern Christians believe, it's not inherent within the person, but the environment causes us to be tempted and to sin and to fall. And so therefore it has to be remedied in some way. It either has to be remedied by following the Torah, by believing in Jesus as your savior, by following the prescriptions of Islam or the Quran. We see that definitely in religion. We see it in spirituality. We see it in mental health, psychology. I'm not going to keep belaboring the point, but anything that begins with this idea that we are somehow the main thing is to fix the problem. The main thing is redemption, to fix the sin and the fall. All right, so that's the first part of that. But then beneath that, within Western worldview, is what we call cosmological dualism. Cosmological dualism. Cosmological dualism is a very strict bifurcation. What's a bifurcation? It's a division into two large categories. And it causes us to view the world, to view the cosmos, and to view ourselves in one of two categories primarily that has a moral distinction to it. And that moral distinction is good and evil. So they're inherently, in this worldview of cosmological dualism, there inherently exists, by the nature of things, entities, spirits, aspects of reality that are completely divided and in opposition with one another, divided into two categories that are often in opposition with one another, between good and evil. So, particularly, this affects the way most Western people view what we might call the spiritual dimensions, the spiritual realms, the astral realms, other conscious entities that are out there that are non-human intelligences, non-human entities. So, for example, within Christianity, which most of us are familiar with, we have God, who even the word God, I woke up this morning and was reading Barbara Simon's post that she put about the name God, and it comes from the same German word where we get good. So obviously the name itself equates with goodness. So God is good. God dwells in the light. We have a tendency to add light and darkness to this, etc., and so on. And then we have the devil. Well, with God, then we have the beings that God created, the cherubim, the seraphim, the ranks of the angels, the archangels, the saints, if we're Catholic, whatever it is that we believe. All of these entities have attained a certain type of goodness and a certain type of light and a certain type of virtue. And so they fit into this dualistic category of good. And then over here, we have the devil, or we have entities of darkness that are bent on destruction, that are bent on evil. So we have Satan and his demons. We have, and then that's affecting and influencing humanity. So we have the saints, the Christians, the believers, pick your group, whatever it is, on one side. And then we have the other that is in opposition to us. And these forces are in opposition and trying to gain dominion over one another, so that we live primarily on a planet that is very much concerned with dominion, with dominating one another. And we have a tendency to then look at the world through this dualistic frame. We not only see the world this way, we see the spiritual world this way, but we can see one another this way. We can see institutions this way. This particular institution is sacrosanct and it is blessed. Let's say for Christians, it might be marriage. For Christians, it might be the church. I don't know too many other institutions that Christians might think of that are sacrosanct, but you can put them in the comments. And so, yeah. So you have those sacrosanct things that have to be supported, that have to be upheld. Marriage has to look one certain way. It has to be between one man and one woman. A family has to look one certain way, has to look like the nuclear family. This is all part of what's part of the light. This is all part of what's part of the goodness. The church, we need to have freedom to regulate behavior and morality for other people. This is good and this is of light. And then over here we have systems of darkness. So Hollywood might be one that is a system of darkness. The churches often like to vilify the arts. Certainly anything that might beautify or glorify sexuality is going to be considered as evil. Anything that's going to I don't know. What are other systems? You put them in the comments. Other systems that maybe people think of as good and evil. So colors the way we see the world, colors the way we see other people. And then it colors, this idea, we have this idea of heaven. Heaven is in the sky. Heaven is a place where there is light. Heaven is a place where there will be no darkness, where there will be no night. And hell is down beneath us. There is no light. There is no hope. There's burning. There's fire. There's eternal torment. And generally, that's something located beneath us. And there's a chasm in between the two. I mean, this is classic cosmic dualism There is a chasm between the two. Those that are in hell can't get back up to heaven. Those that are in heaven can't get down to those that are in hell in order to help them. And that's the way we view the world. And then we view ourselves as belonging to one of those two tribes. And almost always we belong to the good tribe. We just fill in the blanks about what the good tribe looks like. The good tribe looks like this instead of like that. Whatever the case may be there. And then we can bring it, especially if we're sincere with this, we bring it into ourselves and we look at the light within ourselves, the darkness within ourselves, the various different aspects of the self we look at, and we will place a moral judgment on aspects of ourselves and say that is evil and darkness. This is good and light. This is high vibration and high consciousness. This is low vibration and low consciousness. And so therefore we want to stay up here and we don't want to go down here. I mean, there's so many different ways that this cosmological dualism affects the way that we see the world. Now, here's what I want to point out. Aaron, why are you belaboring this point? You've spent almost a half hour. You did a whole video on this last week. The reason I'm belaboring the point is exactly for the reason that I said at the beginning, because the first time we hear these things, there's a natural resistance to it, or we don't realize the degree to which these sort of foundational beliefs in our paradigm and belief system have colored and altered and distorted perhaps the way that we perceive reality, so that almost every other thing, oftentimes, for example, in some people's spiritual life, some people's approach to themselves, some people's approach to their life, this is so fundamental that if this were not true, if cosmic dualism was not the way things actually are out there, if it's a distortion or a deletion or a generalization in the mental map and perception, it's a matter of perception rather than in the territory, a matter of reality, it takes a lot to adjust to it, and we have to hear it over and over again sometimes just to understand even what's being said. So let me just put it this way. For indigenous people, for people from shamanic traditions or various other parts of the world or other traditions where this is not part of their collective unconscious, a cosmic dualist frame would not only not make sense to them in their worldview and their approach, it would be offensive and insulting. So let me give you an example. For most native people and their belief systems, I'm talking about like Native Americans, I'm talking about any indigenous group in North America, all right? For them, darkness is not evil. In other words, if you came in and said, there is a place called hell, there's a place where demons abide. I know we don't necessarily believe this today, but definitely when the conquistadors were coming over, this was the predominant belief system within the West, that underneath you is hell, that's where people go when they die. It's a place of torment. In other words, underneath the earth is a place of torment. It's a place of evil. The underworld, metaphysically, is where the devil reigns. It's where the gates of hell are. It's where Lucifer and his agents operate from. Or even if you were to identify those agents, not necessarily with under the earth, which they would have, but just with darkness in general, and you approach these people groups and these tribes who have lived in harmony with nature, who have attributed divine characteristics to the earth, to the mother, who view, spiritually speaking, the underworld as a place of safety, as a place of nurture, as a place where the divine feminine power resides for positive purposes. And you come across then with your Christian worldview, not only is it not going to make sense to them, it's going to be probably offensive to them and offensive to their cultures. So that I'm not the first one to say that in the West, we have a patriarchal system, we have a patriarchal spirituality, we have a suppression of the divine feminine, we have a sort of messed up relationship with nature in general. That leads to all kinds of abuses of the planet that we collectively are doing to Mother Earth. And this can be a real problem. This is not only a real problem in our relationship to the earth and our relationship to the animals, but this also then becomes a real problem in the way that we relate to ourselves. So, what I am suggesting, what I've taken 30 minutes to talk about, almost exactly 30 minutes to talk about and suggest, is that you try on at least a worldview. You don't have to keep it, you don't have to agree with me on this at all. But just try, let's say, for a day or two, or a week, or a month. Try to um, try to view the world in this non-dualistic frame, and try to view yourself in this non-dualistic frame. So that's the first part of what I would say. Because then when I view myself in this non-dualistic frame, that in other words, there aren't really good parts of me and bad parts of me. There aren't parts of me that are walking in light and parts of me that are walking in darkness. Or just throw out this idea that if it's from the light, it's absolutely necessary, good and positive and beneficial. And if it's from the darkness, it's absolutely destructive and evil and malevolent towards me. Try to see the collective, try to see the all, try to see the one in everything. In other words, instead of dividing like God and the devil, try to see it all as divine. And rather than dividing it as good and evil, try to see it all as blessed. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are not evil deeds, that evil in and of itself does not exist, or that good in and of itself does not exist as a reality or as a phenomenon. What I am suggesting, though, is that it's not inherently built into the universe in a cosmic dualistic way. Therefore, it is not built into you in a cosmic dualistic way. This can move us very powerfully away from a spirituality that is built, or even self-help, or our approach to psychology, our approach to self-help, our approach to ourselves can move us away from this sort of governing paradigm of sin, fall, and redemption, or that there is a problem within you that needs to be solved. There is something within you that needs to be fixed. And we can begin then to approach, I think a healthier approach, a different approach, is that we're here and it is what it is, but also that that it's all blessed, that it all serves a purpose, that it is all good in that sense, if that makes sense to you. Just try that way of looking at things. Just try that way of looking at yourself. Now, if we do that, that's going to change the way we view unpleasant circumstances or things about ourselves that we don't like. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, that's the first thing I got through in 30 minutes. Second thing I would say, I promise in my future videos, I won't go on as long of a soliloquy about that. Well, I shouldn't promise that because I may not keep that promise. But anyway, I will set my intention not to do that. And then the second part of this is the way that we view the divine, the way that we view God. We have reduced the concept of God, we have reduced the concept of the divine down to only that which we perceive of as being good, only that which we perceive of as being part of the light. God has to fit within our dualistic category if we begin with a cosmic dualistic presupposition in the way that we are perceiving or believing about the world. Other traditions suggest to us that all is divine, or that God is the all, that all is divine, or that God is the all. Or we could even move away from a strictly monotheistic belief. Monotheism means a belief in one God. And we could understand that part of life, that there are divine patterns of energy, divine packets of consciousness, and divine patterns of energy that fit within the context of love, that fit within the context of healing, that fit within the context of prosperity, they fit within the context of fertility, that these are all divine currents or patterns or packets of consciousness, energies, currents, I like that, in the world that we want to tap into. But that does not discount then other patterns or currents of energy that may reflect something else. For example, there may be destructive elements, or there may be constricting elements and patterns of energy that actually may be just as necessary, not only for to hold things in a certain balance and for experience, but simply for the creation of the world. Now, I don't want to get too far off into that, but I do want you to start to think about everything that you want to access and need to access from the divine is not outside of you. It's super important. Everything that you want to access and everything that you need to access. And again, this is just a way of viewing things. You don't have to agree with this. You don't have to believe this. Just try it on. That all divine power, all divine wisdom, all power, all wisdom, all goodness, things that are preferable to us, are not separate from you, are not other than you, don't exist in a place called heaven that you have to wait to die to get to, or that don't exist apart from you within the resources and storehouses of an entity that is separate from you and other than you, that we call God, that we call Jesus in the West, that we call the divine or the source or the creative source or the creator of all things, or however you want to look at that. But that everything that you need to access to change your life, to benefit your life, to grow spiritually, to become enlightened, all the wisdom, all the power, all the goodness, all the states of being that you want to experience are not separate from you. They are not other than you. They are not apart from you. They are not held in some storehouse or by some gatekeeper that you have to convince through your rituals, your good behavior, and your prayers in order to support you and in order to help you and in order to bless you. But that all of that is inherent within you. That you have access to it through your own mind and your own heart and your own body and your own energetic system and your own consciousness. It is not separate from you. It is not apart from you, but it all dwells and resides within you, albeit much of it is latent, meaning that it has not yet been discovered and it has not yet been activated and it has not yet been brought out. Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 12, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart will bring forth good things. Now, here's the dualism. We can't get around it. You can see how much it's built into the scriptures, how much it's built into the worldview. But nevertheless, let's listen to the principle. The good man out or good person out of the good treasure, the good stored up in their heart, will bring forth good things. And the evil person out of the evil that is treasured or stored up in the heart will bring forth evil things. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Let me say that again. If you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, then what you do not bring forth will destroy you. In other words, this is not what I'm advocating for, is not an approach that puts you constantly at the place of effect where you have no power to be at cause. What I am saying is that all this stuff, view all this stuff, everything you want, the God that you're seeking, the enlightenment that you're seeking, the joy that you're seeking, the change in your life that you're seeking, the healing that you're seeking, all of it is already within you. But some of it, the wisdom that you're seeking, the information that you're seeking, all of it is within you. Although a lot of it may be lying dormant, or using this as a metaphor and a paradigm, all of it or some of it may be in the darkness. It may be in the darkness. But it's still there. You don't know it's there, but it's still there. And without embracing the darkness, without embracing the unknown, without embracing something that previously you had rejected as part of your point of view, might be the very thing that's preventing you from experiencing new possibilities, new potentialities, and new outcomes. And this is the all self. In other words, the all self is the container of it all, but it transcends and it's bigger than it all. And when we begin to identify with a self that is bigger than all the other selves, that is bigger than all the other parts of us, all of the other conscious units. So let's look at consciousness this way. And again, I'm not asserting that I'm right. I'm just offering different perspectives on how to look at things. And then you can decide what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what you want to accept, what you want to reject. Not trying to be right here. I'm just trying to offer different ways of seeing things. So Dr. Donald Hoffman proposes in his theories that we exist in a world of conscious units that are interacting with each other, and that our perceptions are not reality. They're simply the way that we interface or don't interface with various different conscious units. I like this way of viewing the world because it can explain not only normal, ordinary, everyday phenomenon that we experience as human beings, but it also provides a metaphysical explanation for all of the metaphysical, extraordinary, supernatural. That word seems to bother people today, supernatural. But whatever, however you want to define it, paranormal, extraordinary, however you want to define it. Events. In other words, interacting with unseen, non-physical entities, whether they're angels or demons or gods or aliens or whatever you believe or whatever you've experienced, whatever people have believed or experienced or interacted. This is a larger frame and way of seeing the world. So I want you to think about just this idea of conscious units as a way to understand yourself and then ultimately arrive at the greater self. But let's just talk about conscious units. First off, our bodies have an intelligence to them, a massive intelligence to them. We have cells in our bodies that have certain functions, and they know what those functions are, and they carry those functions out, and they collectively come together to do those. So each cell is a conscious unit, and then each type of cell that groups together and does the same things is a community of conscious units. So that the cells that digest your food, that carry oxygen, that fight infection and disease, that heal cuts and broken bones, that carry oxygen, that allows for the activity in the brain, that gives you a covering of skin. You are a collection of a community. Just your body is a collection of a community of conscious units. It's amazing to think about. There is an intelligence, there is a consciousness, there is a community, an entire community, an entire nation. When you think about how many millions of cells are in the body, I don't even know. Somebody that knows can put it in the comments. So all of that is going on now at the level of our self-reflection, or at the level of our what we call mind or self, or there are also a collection of conscious entities that represent different selves, not cells, selves. Now, for example, just to give you a scientific explanation for this, or one that's very observable, we know that we have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere of our brains. We know this, that in the frontal lobe up here, that the brain is divided into two halves, and it's connected by a group of neurons called the corpus callosum. And the left brain carries out certain functions, and the right brain carries out certain functions, and they are very, very different. And they communicate and balance each other, communicate with one another through what's called the corpus callosum. Now, there is a procedure, a surgical procedure that has been performed. I don't know if it's still being performed, but I know it has been in the past, where they will sever the corpus callosum to treat epilepsy. So a surgeon will go in there and disconnect the connection between the two halves. And what emerges from that is two people inhabiting the same body with two very, very different personalities. And in people where this has happened, oftentimes those are in opposition. You can look a lot of this up on YouTube, but there's a classic example where for one individual, the part controlling the left hemisphere was an atheist, and the part controlling the right hemisphere was a Christian, I believe, a believer in Jesus. But we also know the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, the right hand. In this case, for example, the right side of the body the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, the left hand in this case. And there would be times that those two parts would even go to war with one another. In something as simple as fixing breakfast, the left part of the brain wants to make eggs, so that part starts making eggs, but the right side of the brain doesn't like eggs and doesn't want to eat eggs, and so literally starts attacking the right hand that is trying to make the eggs. So that's just an example to illustrate that we are not one self. We are a combination of many, many selves that exist within us. And various different selves have various different tasks. For example, I have a self that when I was 14, 15, 16, I learned how to drive a car. My parents started me driving early, make sure I had more experience before they turned me loose at 16. So I don't have to think about how to drive a car. I had to when I was learning, particularly when I was learning how to drive a stick shift, right? But even driving an automatic, I had to learn how to stay on the road. I had to learn to watch for other cars. I had to learn the traffic laws, all the various different things, the way the vehicle worked, the way the vehicle operated. Now I don't have to think about that because there's a self inside me that knows how to drive that gets activated every time I get behind a wheel. I don't have to sit there and think consciously about it. There is a self that has taken upon the responsibility to drive a car that runs automatically within me. Now, we don't just have selves that learned different life skills that know how to do different things. We also have selves that learned how to relate to other people, how to get what we want, how to think about certain aspects of life, how to relate to other people. I don't think there's a person alive that when they were a kid didn't throw a fit when they didn't get what they wanted as a strategy. And if that strategy worked with mom and dad, if just asking for my needs to be met got met with resistance, or my wants got met with resistance, but if I threw a hellacious fit and got what I wanted, that part becomes reinforced and strengthened. So then as I get older, I just learn how to throw a different kind of fit, a more socially acceptable fit in order to get what I want. I may have a self that gets disappointed by various different things and learns to deal with disappointment through isolationism, learn to deal with disappointment through shutting down. So I'm going to go off and sulk. I'm going to go off and pout as a child, right? None of this is wrong. I don't want anybody to hear any condemnation or shaming in what I'm saying. I'm just giving you examples of how we operate as human beings. If there is a part of me that throws a fit to get its way, which there has been, that part of me isn't always in control, or I'd always be throwing a fit. If there's a part of me that learned to deal with disappointment by going off and sulking, by disengaging, by not trying again, if there's a part of me that learned to approach difficult things by quitting and not trying again, then when I experience disappointment, just like when I get behind the wheel of that car, I know how to start the car. When I experience not getting what I want, the energy rises up, the person rises up in me and says, oh yeah, I remember, if I throw a fit, I can get what I want. And so I might throw a more socially appropriate fit. I might call for the manager and chew out the manager and demand that I get my way, because that's how I learned to get my way. I may have a disappointment in life. I may have something that's difficult. I may have something that's unwanted. And so I learned to isolate myself. So I practice various behaviors of depression. I don't want to get out of bed. I just want to lay there. I just want to cry. I want to get as many people around me to console me as possible. Maybe that's what you did. Maybe your way of dealing with disappointment was to go tell as many people as possible. And so you're one of these people that has to call everybody you know and tell the same story over and over again to everybody. You know, again, I'm not shaming, and I know it can sound like it. I'm not condemning any of this. It is what it is. I'm just saying that these selves are not in charge all the time. They only become in charge when there are certain things that happen in our lives that activate these unconscious parts of the self. And then what can happen for some people is that we will have a self who is a critic, an internal critic. We will have a self who is an internal judge. And one of these parts will get activated that I don't like. And I'll behave in a way suddenly that I don't like, because that self is acting out. That conscious unit is acting out. That conscious unit, if you will, has taken the driver's seat away from the other conscious unit that was in charge before, and acts and drives the car a certain way or acts a certain way. And then I have this internal judge, this internal critic, especially if I have a sin, fall, redemption, dualism, cosmological dualism paradigm, that will jump up and start accusing and condemning and blaming that other self. And what do you think happens to that self? If you can think about this self as a child, this is a child. It was a child that learned to throw a fit and get its way. It was a child that learned to sulk. It was a child that learned any of these other behaviors that we may not like or that we may not appreciate. And so the internal judge, the righteous, the good part, comes up and says, why the hell did you act like that? You should be ashamed of yourself. You're so no good. You're so worthless, whatever. This thing can also start comparing you with other people. You might see someone that looks like they're living their best life on social media, and you start thinking to yourself, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not even coming close to that. Yeah, I'm lazy. I haven't worked as hard. I'm not as smart. You see what I'm saying? But we start shaming and condemning those other parts. And if we're not careful, we will take them on as an identity. This really happens. Now, remember, I'm speaking as a licensed mental health professional with professional training and schooling. So I'm not just blabbering something. I am going to say, generally speaking, that some people, and in fact, some therapists, are so interested in pathologizing you, in identifying where your mental illness or your sickness is, that they will give you labels and definitions of what those labels mean that people will then internalize as their entire identity. I am an anxious person. I have depression. I am depressed. When I say I am depressed, I'm saying this is what I am. I am anxious. This is what I am. I am bipolar. Excuse me. I am bipolar, whatever the case may be. And that can become our identity. What I'm suggesting is that we don't have one. Let me restate this, because I was going to say that wrong. What I am suggesting is that in our experience of ourselves, there is, just like there is a community of conscious units that make up our body, there is a community of conscious units of consciousness that make up our personality. And it's not just one thing. It is the interaction and the relating of many different types of conscious units that are within us. And that whatever is functioning or operating at whatever given time is only one small part of that community. It is very much a little self. It is very much a little s. and that there is, and there does exist within each one of us, the big self, the big S, the all self, the larger self, that is much bigger and much greater than any one of these other smaller selves that belong to our own internal family system or our own internal community. And that by recognizing this and by identifying with the larger self, with what we might call the divine self, the transcendent self, the soul, the eternal self. So in other words, my behavior patterns to a large degree are the byproduct of my conditioning and the way I learned to interact in the world as a child that I have brought with me into adulthood. And each one of those represents a conscious unit. Each one of those represents a part of my own internal family system that has a job to do, that has a task, that has a purpose, that has an intention. And sometimes, oftentimes, that smaller self takes over. And in those moments, I experience that as the totality of the self. This is the point I'm trying to make. In those moments, I experience that self as the total self, as the all self, as the whole self. And it's not the total self. It is not the whole self. It is just very much a smaller part of the self. And it's very important that I try to, as much as possible, realize that no matter what I'm going through, no matter what I'm experiencing, this is the smaller self. I've been very open about health challenges that I've been going through lately on this channel. And the self that is regaining health, that is regaining strength, that's being restored and renewed, but still has infirmity that it's dealing with, that is not me. That is part of me. That's a smaller me, but I can identify with the I am within me. I can identify with the greater me. I can identify with the bigger me. I can identify with the me that absolutely is eternal. So this is where I'm getting into my personal beliefs. I personally believe in the existence of a soul. I personally believe in an existence that predates my birth, my actual birthday when I was born, that predates my conception in my mother's womb, a soul and a self, a consciousness unit, a divine spark, a divine self that predates that it comes before that, and that will very much exist after that once this biological self, with the personality of this biological self, with all of the programming that came from this world with that self, is put off at the end of my life, whenever that may be, because I don't want to live in this body forever, I don't think, or as this personality or an identity, an ego forever, I don't think. Eventually that's going to be put off, but the eternal part of me is going to progress. That eternal part of me is still in here. It's not just something that I can experience before I incarnate and then get to experience more fully after I take this biological self and the personality and the ego that goes with it off at death. This is the whole reason for spiritual practice, the whole reason for meditation, the whole reason for connecting with spirit allies and helpers, and connecting with the divine, and connecting with the creator, and connecting with the divine feminine, and going into the darkness or coming into the light. The whole purpose of all of it is to be able to, in a very real way, experience the larger self, the divine self, the expansive self in these moments, so that I realize, even though what I'm experiencing right now is unpleasant, this is not the totality of who I am. I'm not going to reject this moment or this experience or this emotion or this self, but I'm also not going to become hypnotized or entranced in the experience by the emotion, by the thought, by the feeling, by whatever's going on around me, to believe that this is reality, to believe that this is the total self, to believe that this is the all in all. No, I can step back from that and say, even though I'm experiencing unpleasantness right now, even though I may be experiencing depression right now, even though I may be experiencing anxiety right now, even though I may be experiencing my body is unhealthy right now, whatever the case may be. This is just a moment in time. This is not concrete and anchored in eternity. This is a moment in time. This too shall pass. And this is just an experience that I'm having, but I am forever a larger self. I am forever an eternal self. And there is infinite resources within me. There is infinite possibilities within me. And that can give me, just that thought alone, just remembering that, just rehearsing that to myself, can give me the ability to transcend whatever moment in time, whatever experience of the smaller S, whatever experience of the smaller self that I am experiencing. Is just that. It's the smaller self. It's a moment in time. It's something that is subject to change. You see what I'm saying? All right. So that is my talk for today on Sunday Morning Live. Thank you for joining with me. I'm passionate about these things, and I'm not going to apologize for my passion. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for all the comments. I'll have to go back and look at those. But let me know again in the comments what you think about this. Feel free to challenge and disagree. That's how I grow as well. And I look forward to being with you next time. Oh, let me just say this. If you're watching on YouTube, couple things. If you're watching on YouTube, you can join, if you want to, our private Facebook group on Facebook. It's called New Day Global. I believe the description is in the bio, or the link, I'm sorry, is in the bio if you want to join the group. I'm trying to do more things. There are other people that are posting some great stuff. If you want to be part of that community, please feel free to join on that private Facebook group. Also, if you appreciate what we're doing and you want to contribute and help support us, please subscribe, like, comment, all the stuff that you know to do. Share the video. And I'll include in the description, because I forgot about it, but I will include in the description the link to our PayPal account. If you want to make a donation and support what we're doing, we really appreciate that. That empowers what we're doing and keeps us going. So there's my call to action. God bless you guys. Namaste. Whatever your tradition is for just wishing well for others. I just want to honor that and honor you. Thank you for watching. And have a great rest of your day, evening, night, whatever time you're watching this. And if you're watching by replay, if you watch live, thanks for watching live. Thanks for commenting. If you're watching by replay, I really appreciate you taking the time